Hi everyone, it's Alban, and today I am here with my good friend Eimer Boyle. So this is a new format where I am in conversation with wonderful people. And the intention for these videos is to fuel your self-discovery journey by sharing stories from my tribe, clients, some friends, some fellow practitioners, and the reason is that rather than just me telling stories, either my own or that of my clients that are kind of pre-digested, I feel that there is a real gold in hearing directly from the individuals themselves. So, Ima, thank you very much for joining me. Let me introduce you properly. So, you're Eimer Boyle. You are a fellow coach and facilitator, and you are the founder of Being in Conversation. That makes you the perfect person to start this series with. And you facilitate soulful discussions for individuals or groups at key transition points in their lives and in their leadership. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your friendship. And thank you for joining me in this experiment, first of all.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Pleasure. So the planned format for this video is really to have an informal discussion, and I've got my cup of tea here. We are going to be leisurely about it. And the idea is to discuss topics that resonate with us both, to give our audience some more depth and some different perspectives, maybe. And today, the kind of theme I want to explore with you is the idea of integrating our essence and our spirituality into our life's work. And that's prompted by two phrases that you use and that I absolutely love. The first one is you say that you'll never do another day's work in your life. And I just love that. And I just want to explore that. And the second one is that you say that your boss is the divine, which is equally interesting. So I'd love to explore these two topics with you. But before we go into this, I'd love you to give our viewers some background about your work. Yeah, I know you do a lot of work with people in leadership roles, be it in the home, in the workplace, or in the community. So, would you like to give our viewers some background, please?
Sure. I was reflecting when you were talking about the power of story that really what we're sharing is the human story, the story of our human experience. And so from this place where the story is what it is for now, there's been experience in classrooms and in small businesses and in the corporate space. And over time and through that human experience, it's become more and more clear the power of individual work on our interior and collectively working together, how we share that experience externally in our words and in our deeds. So that's really the human story, the individual human story of here, and the collectiveness of all the people that have supported and been part of this life story too here. All the teachers, all the mentors, all the coaches, all the clients, all of humanity, everything. And so I suppose the noticing is that from time to time, people will say things like, oh, I love when you say this, or this really intrigues me, or this really frustrates me about you. And yet it's an expression in time. And so those expressions that you're referring to, one day they just were there. That's what happened. There was a noticing of those phrases. And that's probably part of the human story, is to the capacity that we have to speak, to listen, to cognize, and then as we mature, to be able to listen to ourselves and then become curious and wonder what that really means, if anything.
And what that means for others and how others hear it and how they receive that story, isn't it?
Yeah. So I suppose in our common ground as facilitators and coaches, we know the power of starting with the self.
Yes.
So if you're going to like coach others, then one must do the work on self first.
You see me scribbling is because there are things I want to come back to.
So, the human experience that happened here was that many different jobs, many different jobs through the life. And then what happened was there was a redundancy. So that's the end of the job.
Okay.
And a friend of mine used to always remind me that you are not redundant. The role is made redundant.
Absolutely.
And so that's another good practice and it's a thing that humans do, is they make distinctions.
Yes.
So in making distinctions, it can bring things to light, but it can also limit us in how we make distinctions. So in that time of my life, when that job finished, there was sort of a clearing and awakening to what even is a job. What
Interesting
even
question.
is work? So it started an inquiry into how much we conceptualize, and here was a pathological conceptualizer, and that flavor still hangs around. And simultaneously, due to the love of concepts and ideas and systems, that curiosity fed an inner inquiry into what is that and how does that come to be. So that phrase of never working again, even when it was said in that moment, it was heard and sort of held to inquire into.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you work and then you finish work at 5 o'clock, or you finish work on a Friday, that means that people love the weekend and they don't like Monday morning.
Don't love the work, yeah.
So that means that love happens on Saturday and Sunday, but it doesn't happen on Monday morning. So playing with all of that as a concept, it seemed like if I never work again, it means I have one life.
Yes, it's
One
integrated.
whole life. And it took more years for clarity to come at maybe deeper levels of what that actually meant. But that doesn't even matter. That's really not what matters. What matters is to pay attention to what is happening.
Yes, and that's something that
And
you
then,
are really good
and
at,
then,
which is being in the moment, an observer, which very few people can do. To be able to be in something and observing it at the same time is something that's rather unique.
well, it's actually not unique in the sense that everyone can do it. It just depends whether it's something you want to be doing. Do you want to be more present to the moment, or do you like thinking about the past and imagining the future? This is the thing about being human. There's different aspects of ourselves about what we preference, what we like to do, what we don't like to do, what we resist doing. And yet, the longer we're breathing and living, there is the capacity to be more fully realizing what it is to be alive.
And I think that's what you're describing here is that notion of work you have completely turned on its head. And I tend to use the term of life's work rather than work, or craft. Really love using the word craft these days. I'm not talking about what I do as my job or my work. I call it my craft, because as you said at the very beginning, it is about working on yourself first, getting to know yourself first, getting to understand your mechanics, your triggers, your cabling, your inner functionings. And from that place, and only from that place, can you do something that has true depth and substance. And it's that notion of this life work, this craft, as an extension of who you are, and not as something that is divorced.
And so when you say craft, what does craft mean to you?
To me, it feels that there is a dimension of artistry to this. There is a dimension of mastery to this. And these two elements are really important because I know a friend of ours talks about doing your art, and there is that dimension. But I like the idea of craft because there is something about the recognition that there is a process. And the artistic element is important because it is about being expressive and creative in our work. But I like to add to that the dimension of the slow process of maturing and growing. If you look at the historical guilds in any craft, it is that notion that you start at the bottom and you learn and you practice and you repeat and you practice again. And then from there, you gain mastery. And to me, that is a beautiful way to work. And I would argue that's the only way for things to be meaningful. I'm loving the fact that where I am in the UK, there is a resurgence of the notion of apprenticeships because I think it's crucial. It doesn't have to be just in our line of work. What we're saying is not just about coaching and facilitating. And I want our audience to know that we are not just talking about the bubble of, oh, it's easy for us to say that because we can be kind of woolly or anything else. That's not the case. What we're talking about here is a mastery into being yourself in your day's work, in your life's work. What do you think?
Well, the reason the question was asked was really to highlight that what that means to you, that word has a resonance to it that grounds you in your work. And so that part of the human story and the human relating is to be very clear what it means to the other person when they're expressing life and what matters. So apprentice was the word that actually came to mind here too. The learning, the love of learning, the commitment that is required in learning, the discipline, the discipleship of learning. And so the artistry, it's like the art of living. We are learning what even life is a concept. So what does it mean to be fully alive? So fully exploring our humanness, our capacity as humans to be able to be, butchers and bakers and candlestick makers. So those, early concrete craft related, the work that people did, and then
Still do.
still so fundamental, right? So the concrete reality that is so required, that grounds us in this world, and then our capacity to imagine and create, and engineering, and the buildings and the bridges and the ideas and the philosophies and the internet and all of that comes from humans, doing their art, the discipline, the mastery to be able to master whatever it is that calls them. So that it's also the curiosity of how we would in the past have talked about a vocation.
Yes.
Something that calls you. And now we're talking about sort of career paths.
Doesn't sound the same, does it?
It's not quite. So it shows how our language changes over time and points to what matters. So there's truth in the sense that you can craft a career, if that's what you mean. You can pave a way, if that's what you mean. But if you think that there's a career path and a career track that is correct and right, then that meaning can be limiting.
And also, we are both here to say life changes. I mean, you have experienced redundancies, so have I. You've experienced other type of sudden change in your professional life. So I think that's why, going back to that phrase that you use of never do another day as work in your life, that's also important, because when things like that happen, you do not lose your footing so much. Because as your friend had said to you, you are not redundant. The position might be, but you are not. And I feel that's another really strong element that there is in that phrase, which is that if you know who you are, and then from there you express into your work, then if the expression is severed for whatever reason, it doesn't matter. It doesn't change who you are. It doesn't change your essence on this side. You just have to find another outlet. That doesn't mean to say that it doesn't hurt or it is not challenging practically, none of that. But it just means that it doesn't affect you as deeply in who you are. Neither with the sense of rejection that you mentioned. If you're being told you are redundant, this is actually really aggressive phrase. Whereas if you recognize that the essence of who you are remains, and your craft, your mastery, your gifting is available still. It hasn't been taken from you just because the job title has. And that, I feel, is also essential, because it means that then you can transpose yourself into the next story much more healthily and much more whole, really, rather than having felt that you had lost parts of yourself in the process.
So the story will always be historical, because we look back and we can make sense of it all. So the nowness and the essence that is, that you're freely available to then express
Yes.
in a place where you are now. So if this job disappears for whatever reason, the complex reality of systems and economies and etc., then you're free. Then you look around and you go, okay, now what? Express what, where, when. And it's not rational. It's something that emerges, and you can't necessarily imagine. Did we imagine we would be here today having this conversation? It's beyond our imagination. So I suppose potentially another common ground is noticing that we can call it work, but is it work? The work on the self, the inner work, allows such a playful experience to come forward in living. The joy of living, to just play with what is here and what's available as best we can for now. And to realize that as human beings, even that limits us. Our humanness, while it has much potential, it still has a limit. It has a finite time.
And it's okay. And it's something.
And that's all right. Because that's
actually,
true.
That's right. Absolutely. That's the 3D reality. We might have lofty ideas or anything else, but actually it is good to be grounded in whatever we say. I really want our viewers to see it as notions that are not just somewhere as a dreamy state at all. This is very tangible. This is about recognizing that being yourself is not just this generic idea. It has to be integrated in your life, your time, your 3D reality. This is very, very tangible. It is about being congruent, not just with some esoteric idea of living, but the reality of your life. And I think that's really, really important to highlight, because I feel that sometimes people might hear those types of discussions and see them as, oh yeah, that's all right for you. You're into that kind of realm of you can think about things. No, I don't think that's what it is. I think that both in your case and mine, this reflection is about how do we do precisely the opposite. How do we integrate that essence into the practical? And perhaps I want to ask you, actually, you talked just a moment ago about this idea of playing with things. And I'd like to elaborate on that with a particular angle, which is to kind of perhaps, would you be able to recommend small steps to our viewers on how they can get to that place where their activities are more congruent with their true nature? You know, how do we practically get here?
Well, practical ways have two elements. It's what are you going to do, and then the practice of how often are you going to do it. So if you've got young children, watch how they do it. So that playfulness of whatever they have, whatever they find, they go, well, let's play with that. Let's play with each other, play by myself, play with the toys. So they have got that playfulness. Why are they playing? Because they're playing. Are they playing to get something? Are they playing to be better than somebody else? So part of the playfulness is to notice what you're doing now in your life. Like what are you doing? Are you working for what reason? Are you living for a particular reason? And then play with that conceptually and play in the world, literally, of giving yourself time to play, however you like to play. It's kind of a way of shaking ourselves up, getting ourselves out of routines that have kept us in a sort of pattern, a linear pattern of this is what I do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Even playing with the fact that is there really a weekend? Is it really Monday? So it sort of circles back to what we also at the start you were mentioning about working for God. That was a playful thing that came in that, you know, whatever you work for, however you relate with the world, if you work for money, if you work for status, then that becomes your focus of attention. So it can be then more money, more status, whatever. So from a God perspective is to put in all of the possibility. So God might be universal. God might be fully alive. So if that is your God, if that is your reason, it's still a relating with. It's still very human formed, but it's playing with something bigger. So it's like a sort of saying what, because there was a time when the expression here used to be playing with games, and then sort of the realization, like, is it a game? That can sort of take you away from the groundedness actually of the beauty of here, because it isn't a game.
It isn't a game, but it's still playful, and that's a paradox.
But it's playful, yes.
It's keeping that lightness, and perhaps that's something that I completely see, is that we tend to associate work with something that's hard and that's graft and that's unpleasant and all the rest of it. And I'm not saying that some elements of any work are not that. They can very well be in any work. But the fundamental idea that we can grow and express and create something of worth, which is the whole point of work, in a way that remains light and congruent and playful, we have to step away from that idea. It's work or play. It can be work and play. It can be that the play is the work. And I think that's where you're going with that, is that we can keep that childlike approach to what we create. That doesn't have to be hard. That doesn't have to be scripted. That doesn't have to be that can be very structured, but that doesn't have to be limiting necessarily.
And you know, the evolution of humanity has been language. And so language has transformed our capacity to express ourselves, and simultaneously it is a structure. So therefore all structures have a limit to it. So playing with words and what are words and what word means and what do they mean to other people, that's another way to the practice of paying attention to words, or not paying attention to them, or, whatever, however you want to play it. It is a sort of, it's the paradox, the polarity, is the playfulness of all of this. And I think also the normalness is another thing. That the reality is of many, when you talk about the off with the fairies and the clouds and the dreamer, Eimer dreamer, big dreamer. So the grounding back, it's like a full circle back to grounding into the ordinariness of our extraordinariness.
Absolutely. I'd love to move on to our other subject that you already touched on very briefly, which is the idea that your boss is the divine. So again, before we go into it, for our viewers, I just want to say a few words. The first thing is to say, whatever words you guys feel comfortable with, use those, translate our words for yours. So if it's God, if it's source, if it's spirit, if it's the whole, whatever you choose to refer to as for the divine, that's fine. Use those words. I mean, neither Eimer nor I are particularly bound by a particular school of thought. So, feel free to adapt the words. Likewise, if you hear words like prophetic, psychic, channeling, being an oracle, being a seer, some of those words I know can be very comfortable to some people and fairly incendiary to others. Don't worry about our vocabulary. Hear the essence of our conversation behind it. So before we go into things any further, Eimer, again, would you like to briefly outline your spiritual journey? What has been your connection with the divine, and for you to come to this place where you said that your boss is the divine?
Well, at first, it's a bit of a paradox, isn't it? To have a boss is a hierarchy, and it presupposes that God is higher. And yet it's kind of points to the higher aspect of ourselves, like our essence. So grew up in Northern Ireland in a Catholic family. And so I would say that I was gifted the gift of faith. And it's really hard to know what that is because it's just how it is in a family. That's the culture of how you do things and how you speak about things. And so that's that sort of sense of God and rituals and mass and service and helping others, that gets ground in early. And then growing up in teenage years and beyond that, as the sort of, as the individual self comes online, then the questioning and the resistance to the dogma or the why or the for what reason. And yet there was always an underlying something, some sort of sense of something. So what is that thing? And it started to get fed really through learning about human development. Understanding how humans work, understanding how humans evolve, understanding consciousness as much as we can. And yet that still wasn't it. It just, there was something else. And so what happened was I met Joseph Scott, who had a model called, his model is a model of awakening called Moment 7. And that was looking at that self. That's so a spiritual sense. And it's in terms of what's being researched and what's available, we see that it's very natural. The intellectual self and the development of the self is how we evolve, and that takes priority until it doesn't. And then the spiritual quest seems to take the lead.
That's interesting because that's one thing where we are completely different. I did not realize that. So you see, our viewers are going to discover both perspectives, but we are discovering it for each other as well. My story is very different because I've literally always connected with the divine. literally as a child, so much so that when I came to a place where people would start to want to, say, convert me to anything, if you want, I really had that issue. So, for instance, and it can be on any faith system, but people telling me, you've got to come to Jesus to go through God, and through Jesus to go to God. And I'm thinking, I've been talking to God since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. Why do I need anybody else in the middle? So for me, that was really that sense that the connection with the divine was such an obvious part of my reality that actually it was the other way around. I did search because I wanted other people to kind of articulate, particularly as a youngster, articulate for me what I was living, but often it felt like it fell short, because there was that sense of coming from the view of having those structures and those rituals as you described at the beginning. Whereas for me, it was a case of literally having conversations like I would have conversations with you. And in a way, I went through a phase of it being entirely natural to it becoming difficult and uncomfortable, because I was hearing all these narratives and they all had some meaning, but I couldn't quite make sense of them. And then I came to a place where everything started to settle again, which is rather than struggle with these narratives from various faith systems and belief systems, it was actually recognizing that we were all seeing the same elephant, but from a different perspective. And that settled things a lot, which is why when I said in introduction of this part, that we were not troubled with a particular school of thought or a particular vocabulary, is because I realized for myself that actually whatever you choose to call it, there is that same connection. There is that sense of connection with something that is the universal essence. And being able to connect, you were talking about that earlier, I will call it the God self, tapping and make sure that you're connected to that source. In a way, irrespective of how you view that doesn't make the reality of that connection any less tangible. So I really went through a very strange journey of natural, then articulated and intellectual, and then holistic connection with the divine, where the intellectual pursuit had fallen into place and I had regained the natural aspect of that connection with the divine.
And yet, however it is for each of us, it's natural. It is our way of how it was for us and how it is for us. And this is again sort of the intellectualizing, but the fact that religion from a Catholic perspective is fed in a particular way, like what is happening to come full circle is to realize what actually was the gift of faith when you clear away the misunderstandings of what was interpreted by a society, by a younger self, by the time that it was,
our history and everything else that comes in.
all of it, the complexity of all of it, for it just to clear itself, for it to be. It's almost it's like, well, it's not almost, but it's like the childlike wonder is so natural, but they just don't have the consciousness of it, and then it's full circle back to seeing it consciously, but there's nothing new. It always was. It's just now clear.
And deeper. Actually, this journey that we both describe, I would not dismiss it for anything, because although it might have felt uncomfortable at times, it actually has made the connection and the understanding, and I don't just mean intellectual understanding, but holistic understanding, much deeper, much richer, because by taking on those ideas and thinking about what people mean and understanding why they live their faith a certain way and so on, if you can be in a position where you receive it openly, then you can gain the gold from that, and that enriches your own journey, I feel.
And you know, that back to the phrase about the boss, the boss is God. You know, that speaks to the history of how there's always hierarchies. So it allows the opportunity to say, you know, why do we need a boss? What is a boss? So that idea even of having an inside and an outside, the breathing in and breathing out, we need both. So being alive is the expression. The essence is simply divine. And so your expression is divine. And that's really the work, is to realize what is your really true expression, as opposed to being sort of habitual and enculturated expressions. Nothing wrong, that's just how it is. So that's the playground.
I was going to say it's interesting because then there is the application of that, I suppose, which is how, you know, to say your boss is the divine is one thing, but then what does that look like in practice? And I will say for me, it's about being mindful of the prompts of, I call it the whole, capital W, you know, it's really that sense of connecting, as you say, in kind of the first part of our discussion, we're connecting with our essence within, and now we're talking about the connecting with what is outside of ourselves, only to discover, by the way, that it's one and the same thing, as you just said. But
Yeah.
with regards to the kind of the outward elements taken somewhat in isolation, to me, I think there is something important about what you describe as God as your boss, or I would describe as guidance. It's learning to be mindful of the prompts that the universe is sending you. How does that feel to you in your experience?
Yeah. So probably slightly different language, which is not surprising, just given our histories. So it's kind of maybe like from the history of a Catholic language, it might say something like the soul's calling.
Mm-hmm.
And so rather than listening to people outside or reading books that and you go, oh, that's very interesting, it's turning it inward to what is moving you, what is calling you. You can't not do it. It just it's so it does itself. You're like, here's happening again, here it's this. And when you reflect on your whole life, seeing that was a very common expression, really, always.
I like the fact that when you described it, you felt the need to express
To
it
move,
in
yeah.
movement as well,
Yeah.
because to me, one huge part of it is a holistic experience. That sense of um, coming back to source, or you know, whatever you might want to call it, or tapping into source, or tapping into the divine. All of that, to me, is very much a physical and sensory experience. Yes, there is a reflective aspect. There is an intellectual engagement. As I've said many times before, when you go to church, God is not asking you to leave your brain at the door, you know, so it's not as though it's just blindly going into something. But equally, it's not just intellectual. It is completely holistic. It is about feeling that emotion and that sense of being in that flow, and we both do the same. We have to use these gesture to express that, because I think that's one big thing for me, is having the divine as my guiding thrust, if you want, is you are in that flow. It is very much of being into that movement, is into that tide that's moving forward wherever it's meant to go. And you can choose to step outside of it. You can choose to swim against it. Nobody's forced to go in that direction at all. But there is such a sense of congruence, and when you're aligned into it and you move forward, and we have that sense of that propulsion forward. And I think that makes a lot of sense to me, that holistic and very sensory experience.
Comes up the metaphor of the ocean. So if you're swimming against the tide, if you're fighting the rip, to realize that you can't swim somewhere else in the ocean. Like there's you can't there's it's the ocean.
There's plenty more rope.
You can't go to this bit of it or that part of it. It's all of it. So that's us swimming in the in the divine, in the universe, in the whatever, and the grounding practices is how does it get expressed in the world, like the discipline of that, the consistency of that, the truthfulness of that.
How does that
And
work for you? Again, thinking of practical ways for our viewers to tap into. You talk about this discipline, and that's a very key word. How does that work? Tap into divine as your guiding principle, if you want.
it was one of the consistent practices has been sitting every day, sitting, again, that word sitting, meditating, reflecting, journaling, and over time just allowing that practice to mature itself, to so that initially it's the consistency every day, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, reflecting on what's happening inside, what's happening in life, noticing, and as that sort of matures itself, it's really the dynamic of stillness and movement. So the stillness that is there is you, and the movement of you. So what's moving, and then it's a practice until it's the realization of the reality of the no movement and the moving simultaneously. I think the other thing that comes up here in the moment is that the practices and the different things that have happened through the years, often a teacher arises, a process arises, a learning arises, a commitment arises. It's individual work for each of us to do, but it's a collective
And the
requirement.
resourcing is provided when you are ready to get to the next step. Yes.
Yeah. So, not sure from your perspective, but there was a tendency to simply know this is the book, this is the teacher, there was a knowing, and then to follow that rather than to listen. Many people offered me many things, but the difference between the recommendation and then to sit with the knowing,
Yes.
and then move from that place. And let's not sit here saying all is known here.
No, definitely not.
It is known. It's
But
just
not by
not
us.
fully realized.
No, I think it's interesting to hear you describe that, because I absolutely agree with what you describe on your practices for grounding. As you say, it's about committing to the discipline of dedicating time to having that space where, in my vocabulary, it's about coming back to center. It's about making sure that I somewhat silence the busyness within and without, and to come to that place of being fully present and being fully connected, or as fully present and connected as I can be in that moment, but committing to showing up. And that's really is the kind of the background practice, I would say.
And the other thing too would be that however we're describing it will sound familiar because we learnt it from wherever we learnt it from. So it's also that there is no way, the right way, the one way. It's that it's the way for you.
The other thing I do really resonate with in what you say is that notion of knowing. When you know, you know, and we're both wired that way. I'm fully aware. Where I've had many experiences in my life where I can be minding my own business, and suddenly there is that real sense of a tap on the shoulder, and as you say, that's the book you want, that's the person you need to call right now, go and do that, go and see that. And it has that sense of, it's so blindingly obvious, you can ignore it, you have the choice to ignore it, but you can't say that you haven't sensed it, you haven't heard it, because that's actually not true. It is there, and it is loud and clear. The third aspect beyond that grounding and that knowing, for me, in that connection to the divine, is the practice of asking. People might call it prayer, but for me, it's more specific than that. So, for example, in preparing this interview, I diligently prepared, had some thoughts about it, jotted them down, did all of that. But once I'd done my bit, I stopped and asked, what needs to be said? What needs to be heard? What needs to be channeled in this conversation? And that's the place where you say, in effect, I have done my part. I have put, back to what we said at the very beginning, I have done my craft. I have put my mastery in play, but I know that there is still something more. So now, what needs to travel through? What needs to be aired and voiced into that discussion? What needs to come out there? What needs to be materialized through this conversation? And that's not mine. I very much see that as that connection with the divine, where that's coming through us rather than from us. The more you practice it, the more the distinction between the two blurs, and the more aligned you are at any given time, the more the distinction blurs. But I really still sense that there are two elements. There is what comes from our mastery that we talked about in the first part, and what comes from something beyond.
So we could say that it's the human mastering, and then being.
Yes.
Being present to, and then what spontaneously shows up.
Absolutely. Well, we've gone through so much ground together, Eimer, as we always do. For people who are just saying for once this conversation between us, conversation between Eimer and me are always like that. This is how we go. We go very deep into all these wonderful subjects, and today you had a chance to view it. So I think, Eimer, we're going to wrap up now. Is there any final thoughts that you want to share with us?
Thoughts?
Of course.
No thoughts to share. It's really in this moment is really to for me, for all of us, getting to know who you are, who you're not, and then to enjoy being alive.
That's a lovely way to finish our conversation. Thank you very much, Eimer. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for helping me play with that idea of integrating your essence and your spirituality into your craft or your life's work. So thank you for your time. And to our viewers, I will be posting this interview in full so that you can really feel our essence, and also so that you can feel part of this tribe of people seeking to be truer to themselves, because I recognize that it can feel kind of isolated sometimes. And then I'll probably post some snippets of this video by theme so that it makes it easier for you guys to find it on YouTube. As always, if you have feedback, I would love to hear it and see it. So comments on any platform where you see this video. Eimer, I'm sure, will also comment and reply. I will put some information about being in conversation so that you can find Eimer online. Thank you very much for watching. Bye for now.